What I regret is the communication around it. I think it's fair to say that we did not appreciate how the market would perceive the sales.
Oleg Vornik, thank you for joining the business.
Thanks for having me.
It must be a bit of a relief this week to be talking about surging revenue, a profit and new contracts, as opposed to what you were talking about at the end of last year.
We certainly had a lot happening from November to now, and as we've seen this week, in addition to record results, we announced sweeping changes to our corporate governance, where we engaged Freehills to establish gold standard essentially across all of that side of the business to give investors more confidence. And of course, the quadrupling of revenues, having $3.5 million profit, swing from the loss position last year, and generally significant scale up of the business.
And of course, in November, we're sort of referencing that big share sale that you, along with two other directors, enacted, if you like. That did rattle confidence among investors about the future outlook of the company. Do you regret that now?
So what I regret is the communication around it. I think it's fair to say that we did not appreciate how the market would perceive the sales, and that was not the first time we sold, for those that have been following the company for a while. So the way we get those shares, as we're not the original founders of the business, but executives, is, and this is across a number of people in the business, not just the three people who sold, you have these performance shares. They vest when you reach particular aggressive metric criteria, so essentially rapid scaling of the revenues, and then you have opportunity to sell those resulting shares. And so we've done this in the past. There was really not much attention from the market, as essentially the shares were compensation for sub-market cash remuneration. But I think what we didn't appreciate is that now that we're an ASX 200 company with much bigger size, the market scrutiny is significantly higher, and so of course off the back of that, there was quite a lot of attention that we received.
I saw you quoted in the newspapers as feeling a bit bitter, calling it tall poppy syndrome. Is that how you felt?
I think to an extent, where the reality is that I run a business where I was the very first employee, really a garage company with not much to it, to what is today, I believe, the largest public listed defense company in Australia with $3.5 billion valuation, but also importantly, rapidly scaling revenues, so a couple $100 million in revenues and 500 employees and so on. And there's been very little positive focus on all of that compared to the negative focus we received in November. And the argument, I think, in a lot of people's minds is, well, you're not allowed to take any money off the table until eventually at some point the company is sold, which I actually don't quite agree with. And I think if we're in a place like the US, scaling the business to that extent and being able to take some money off would actually be seen as a positive thing and an example, as opposed to being crucified, which is what happened.
Well, the corporate governance review that's been done has now implemented what's called a front page test. Was it the case that the corporate governance really just hadn't kept pace with the growth of the company? I
think so. So business has scaled really rapidly. So we were in All Ordinaries Index only in March 24, then in September 24 ASX 200, then in September 25 got into ASX 200, and now at the rate we're going, I think it's fair to say there's a possibility of knocking on the door of ASX 100. And so as the business grows, I think what happens is a lot of the policies didn't quite catch up, and this is not just for corporate governance, but we're rapidly implementing upgrades to our operational policies and really rules right across the whole business when you're growing so quickly. Like, for example, went from 250 to 500 people just over 1 year last year. And so now I believe we have a lot more adequate set of rules and procedures as given to us by Freehills.
When confidence was shaken among investors last year, shares fell to $1.72, I believe. There was a lot of questioning around the edge that DroneShield had with its drone guns on the battlefield in Ukraine. How do you address those competition concerns? Are you facing competition from other manufacturers, and can you get the edge?
So we're quite unique in the sense that we have a number of commercial and technical differentiators. So in short, we've been here, as in the counter-drone space, from the very beginning, and people often say, well, what's a small technology company at the end of the world in Sydney knowing anything about what's happening in Ukraine or in South America with narcos or anywhere else where drones present a threat? And we actually say that one degree of separation is a good thing, so being in a separate place, but still having strong linkages to end customers all around the world that we developed over the last 10 years that feed us, frankly, almost more information that we know what to do with, that enables us to rapidly implement the technology roadmap. And the business, of course, is a lot more than drone guns. I think drone guns being a hugely popular product and are being associated with the business. But drone guns are only 20% of our revenue if you look in 2025. And vast majority of it, so about 40% each, are our integrated fixed site systems underpinned by our command and control software, as well as our F-Patrols, body-worn drone detection devices. Now, not quite as sexy as a pistol that you might have seen now actually even appears in Battlefield 6, the Electronic Arts computer game, but the drone guns are something that will continue to be sold, but that is not the flagship of the business anymore, which is really all about the complex software with hardware behind it.
And you have ambitions to grow your software, and you use the term SaaS a lot in your investor presentation. But when you hear the word SaaS at the moment, you associate it, or most people do, with the threat of AI. Is there an AI threat here?
I would say we're very different to the likes of pure SaaS businesses for several reasons. One, when it comes to software, it doesn't exist in isolation. So it's a fusion of hardware and highly proprietary software that goes on top of that highly proprietary hardware. And secondly, the information is not something that what SaaS uses, is not something you just scrub off the internet like ChatGPT style. So these are drone signal data bits of information that you have to manually go to a number of different countries. For example, in Japan, they decided that all of their spectrum is going to look entirely different to everywhere else around the world. So we record that together with our customers, and then you do the same in Ukraine and in Colombia and in Asia Pacific. And so with all of this, you have a very proprietary situation that's difficult for others. So how do you collect the data? How do you clean it? How do you fuse it together with hardware? So we certainly use AI tools internally. I mean, average age of our employees is probably in high 20s, so we've got a very, very young workforce on average, but I don't see external AI as a threat. And also keep in mind that when you're dealing with government and military customers, you have a lot more of a closed situation as well, so that kind of high moat, I'd say.
When it comes to your share register, it is predominantly retail investors. What are you doing to increase the interest from institutions?
So we have Fidelity out of Boston, our biggest shareholder at over 7% of the company, and we have a number of others under the substantial threshold. We are actively engaging on a roadshow at the moment, and we've been after every quarterly result, but we are now scaling up that effort with both overseas and domestic institutions. And I think it's fair to say with domestic institutions, they largely know who we are. It's more about just telling them the story, explaining we're not just a drone gun company anymore, and the SaaS and the scale and update to the opportunity overall for the counter drone. But for a lot of the overseas names, the exciting thing now is that we are just large enough and liquid enough for them to make sense. It may sound a bit strange in Australia because $3.5 billion company, not a small business, but for them it's just about the smallest viable size where we become investable. So this is the really exciting thing for us in terms of talking to this sort of tier one global fund managers.
And what's the outlook for DroneShield? Where do you see the growth opportunities?
So there'll be a number of drivers. Firstly, when it comes to the military space, we're seeing this almost an arms race when it comes to defense, where the best way to ensure peace is to be prepared. So when militaries are looking at what's happening in Ukraine now, they're saying, okay, the future of any conflict is both drones and counter-drone equipment. But we have very little counter-drone equipment because nobody thought about protection against drones until the Ukraine war started 5 years ago. But then importantly, in the civilian space, in the public safety space, there is a terrorism threat. So for example, there's FIFA World Cup happening in the US and Canada, Mexico in June, July, and there's a big concern about potential terrorism threat from drones. So we are now talking to a number of US police agencies and generally Homeland Security type organizations, how do they get our equipment to protect stadiums and other venues around FIFA? And I think that will importantly be a segue into critical infrastructure, because people will see counter-drone less as just what military uses and more at, for example, what a data center can use to protect against drones doing cyber threats, or even airports where drones present significant threat to potentially blow out the engines when they're being sucked into airline engines and take the plane down potentially, or other situations which are not strictly military. So we said the military and the civilian market actually half-half roughly, and maybe over the next 5 years, probably half of our sales will be in the civilian space.
And just finally, in Australia, what are the regulatory hurdles that you would need to jump over to be operating in that civilian space here?
So a lot of it, I'd say, would be almost policy rather than truly regulatory, in the sense that our equipment in a number of situations actually allows you to give you location of the drone pilot, which is even better than taking down the drone. So they're passive sensors, they do not emit anything, and they can tell you as the user, this is where the guy with a drone controller is. And so then you can send security and apprehend the pilot. So it's less about change of laws. So recently, for example, there was a change of laws that enables defense to take down drones. You think that this was already being placed, but no, but now we have that. But for a number of other customers, I think it's just a matter of them getting used to the idea that you need counter-drone equipment. And so often, especially to our American customers, we talk about drone 9/11, like a big tragedy involving a drone, but hopefully it's not going to come to that, but it will certainly increase the awareness. So we're just trying to talk to the regulators, talk to the end customers and say, hey, you need to consider counter-drone equipment. And I think gradually we're getting more and more of that adoption happening. Like we had a number of high-profile deployments, trials with data centers in the US in the last 12 months. So we are hoping to start seeing deployment of counter-drone there in the near future.
Oleg Vornik, thank you so much.
Pleasure.